Australians, oh, let's make a choice, for we're no longer free. Our government has let us down and failed our own country. The great Australian dream is for the lucky few, but Aussies know what it really means to be true blue. Lest we forget what's a fair go and make Australia fair. South, we just want to live and grow. Advance Australia fair.
Well, g'day, folks. How you going? Hope you've had a pretty good sort of a day today. It's been flat out around here, I can tell you. Last night, I said that we were going to talk a bit about local councils, and particularly in Queensland at the moment, as local council elections are upon us. There is a great deal of bitterness in local council elections, particularly in the area that I happen to live in, as it turns out. It's rather interesting, and it goes to what we've been saying about who you elect as your local politician. Now, some of these people who've already been elected have forgotten that most of their, if not all of their council meetings are live streamed, and people record that sort of stuff. I've been sent a heap of video of councillors behaving very, very poorly, so much so that I really want to be able to do the justice to this, because your vote is important. You need to know exactly who you're voting for. And I'm going to show you some of them. Don't think you're going to be terribly impressed, just between you, me, and the gatepost. And another issue came out today that I do want to get into and talk about, a very serious one. But before that, I want to say good day to Aussie Sue. God love you. She's one of our moderators. I hope you're feeling better, Sue. I know you've been a bit crook over recent days, so I probably haven't mentioned you much in the last few shows, and I apologise for that. But I have noticed that you're a bit off colour. It's good to see that you're starting to get back on your feet again. There were a couple of other comments that I saw. Dave, thanks, mate. I can't wait for your letter and your book to arrive. Or is that the same thing? I'm not quite sure. We'll figure that one out. Antarctica. Yep, Pete. Antarctica is certainly on people's radar at the moment. There is a lot of discussions about Antarctica, and particularly the Antarctic Treaty, which is how they keep us out of Antarctica, keep anybody out of Antarctica. Turns out Russia has decided to pull out of the Antarctic Treaty, just between you, me, and the gatepost. Ever wondered what making things worse by focusing on what's wrong? We haven't noticed it. Yep, well, we are going to focus on the solutions here, David, and I see you're getting out into your community and helping to do that. That's bloody awesome. Sue, great to see that you're feeling a little bit better. I'll get back into the live chat, and we'll get into tonight's conversation. This is a serious one, folks. The Great Artesian Basin is that bit of blue that you see on the map there. Now, that is the largest freshwater underground artesian basin in the world. It is unique, and it is the lifeblood to rural Australia, in Queensland, in the Northern Territory, Northern South Australia, Northern New South Wales. Right now, a Swiss-based mining company called Glencore, are planning on experimenting with 330,000 tonnes of CO2 waste that will come directly from their coal-fired power station at Millmerran in the Surat Basin. What do they want to do with it? They're going to inject it directly into the Great Artesian Basin. Now, quite rightly, families, farmers, regions are up in arms about this plan, because the damage it could potentially cause is significant. And there isn't enough, I don't think, mainstream media coverage of this significant issue. And it does affect every Australian, even if you don't use water coming from this artesian basin. It does affect you because the water coming from here affects so many other things that will affect you. So I don't know enough about it, but I thought I would get a gentleman involved who is to the forefront for Queensland, South Australian, Northern Territory and Northern New South Wales farmers, but particularly Queenslanders. There is a group in Queensland called AgForce, and from AgForce Queensland, I would like to make very welcome to the show the CEO, Michael Guerin. Michael, thank you very much for joining us tonight on The Voice of Freedom. I really appreciate it.
That's an absolute pleasure. A very important conversation, and appreciate your interest in it, Carl. Thank you.
Mate, I don't think enough people in Australia understand just how important this conversation is. Can you explain to those people who may have never even heard of the Great Artesian Basin just what it means to all of Australia?
Carl, a great question to start the conversation. And the reason AgForce has come out so strongly today and is spending so much members' money on, for example, full-page ads in the Australian at great cost. This is an approvals process that has been going on for a number of years, which is only weeks away from a possible approval for Glencore, the mining giant, to pump industrial waste into the Great Artesian Basin. And your entry comments or your introductory comments laid it out very clearly. We have in Australia a unique environmental resource, some 130,000 times bigger than Sydney Harbour, and a water resource that sits under 4 states and territories, is used by industry, is used by the environment, is used by communities. And in fact, several hundred small communities across Australia rely solely on that Great Artesian Basin. Yet we are weeks away from Glencore potentially having approval to pump in a pilot program over 3 years, over 330,000 tonnes of waste from a coal-fired power station into the Great Artesian Basin. And what beggars belief about that is not pumping that waste underground, but even contemplating pumping it into the Great Artesian Basin. We have in Queensland a number of empty oil fields from which we've taken carbon, so why not pump it back in? But here we are, Carl, to answer your question, potentially weeks away from a multi-year process through federal and state government, with all the approvals looking like they'll be in place to allow Glencore to do something which is irreversible.
Vince Pannell, who's very close to me, he's our IT guy here at the show, says CO2 plus H2O equals carbonic acid. This cannot be a good thing for the Great Artesian Basin.
That's absolutely right. When you pump CO2 or carbon into the Great Artesian Basin, the technical reports have told us a number of things, one of which is you might get things like arsenic and lead coming that interact with those compounds, interact with the carbon as it goes into the Great Artesian Basin with the sandstone, aquifers, etc., and end up in the water sources that are currently held within the rocks. So there are a huge number of potential environmental disasters waiting that is irreversible and could make the water lethal and unable to be used by those communities and that industry that relies on it. Yet you've got all of these empty holes where we've pumped oil. It beggars belief. The concept beggars belief. The idea that it's most of the way through a multi-year approvals process is hard to believe, but that's where we are, and that's why AgForce has come out so strongly. We've exhausted all of the usual avenues, expecting to find reason at some point, but we haven't.
So I just want to show people a few images if I can. They'll come up over us, but we can still keep talking. Now, this is a spring that, you know, it's just in the middle of nowhere, obviously somewhere in a sandy part of Australia, and God knows we've got a few of those. Now, this is just one of thousands or tens of thousands of watering holes, if you like, that are sprung from the Great Artesian Basin. Now, these are on properties. These obviously help with cattle. Now, there's some argument whether or not the water is usable for cattle. It's a bit brackish and all that. But my understanding is, and I'm no cattle farmer, but my understanding is that cattle in those areas have been bred for certain conditions. The drought master can suck water out of a tea tree. I mean, it is still important to have access to that water, even though it might not be, something you or I might like to walk up to and grab a cup of.
It's not all pristine across the mighty vastness of the Great Artesian Basin. You're absolutely right. And we've never claimed that. But to give you an example of what's proposed, some 900 metres, literally 900 metres from where Glencore proposed to pump it in, there is a pig farm that pumps it out for the pigs. Now, you can't tell me that pumping 330,000 tonnes of it under pressure into the Great Artesian Basin won't allow it to travel 900 metres over 3 years and come back up the other one. And what we do know for a fact is that water will no longer be usable for that pig farm. So that's one family out of business. That's jobs gone in that community.
Straight away.
And there are other areas of the Great Artesian Basin where that water is used for human consumption, where it's good enough. Once you put hundreds of thousands of tonnes of carbon into the Great Artesian Basin, it starts doing this over time, and you can't stop it. So long after I've gone, our children, their children, will be subject to something that's completely avoidable. And that's what staggers us about this. This is completely avoidable. We can pump carbon underground if that's the best thing to do without pumping it into the Great Artesian Basin. That's what makes no sense.
Exactly. We've been digging holes in this ground for gas and oil for God knows how many years. There are plenty of holes. I suppose a few of them have got cement plugs in them, but we may well have the capacity to pull those plugs out and fill the hole with the rest of the stuff. I would have thought it's easier to pull one of those cement plugs out of a wellhead than it is to pull out the hundreds of tons of cement at the base of one of these bloody useless windmills that seem to be going up on arable farm, like good farming land all over Australia.
Yes. Well, another great subject, renewables and their interplay with agriculture, an industry that is critical to our future. Food security is, pretty fundamental to human existence. It sits alongside water security. What we have here is water security that they're trying to take away from us. And on the subject you've now introduced, food security being challenged, with at the moment under current modelling, over 1 million hectares just in Queensland that will be put under renewables that's currently used for food production. We're seeing it in windmills, we're seeing it in solar farms, we're seeing it in transmission lines, we're seeing it in all of those things. You only have to drive 4 hours inland from Brisbane and you see it on some of the most beautiful, rich agricultural land in Australia. It needs to be addressed now. We have for generations taken food security for granted. Waltzed into the supermarket, bought locally grown, fresh, healthy food at a reasonable price. And I would say to Australians, we're not actually that far from losing that. So let's be careful about these decisions. Let's rise to these conversations. Let's contribute to the important pieces that need to be fixed now before it's too late.
Well, just on food security then, there's a lot of talk about the supermarkets and how they rot the farmers, the producers. The producers are then put in a position whereby these energy companies can come onto their land and offer them incentives. A couple of $1,000, we want to do a test here. We'll give you $4,000 there if you can let us put up a windmill. Oh, look, hang on. We'll give you $5,000 or $6,000 a pad. And how many will you let us put up? And what's the ongoing lease? Oh, we'll give you, residual income. We'll give you 2% a year. Now, okay, farmers might look at that initially and say, gee, that's that I don't have to do anything and I'm getting 2% a year. But 2% a year is nothing when you're locked into a contract for 20 or 30 years. It's not going to grow. But the earnings the company are getting and the destruction to the farmland where these pads go in. I was reading a report the other day of a farmer who said, and he was a very successful farmer in far north Queensland and had got suckered into allowing these people onto his property. And they're allowed a certain amount of area to put in their pad, but then they need an access road. And then all of a sudden, something that wasn't on the plans, like the line that gets cut diagonally across their property so the transmission lines can get buried or the connection lines between towers can get buried. It all removes area that can be sown and used as an income from the farmer. So instead of that, proportionally small bit that they were meant to get, they in fact destroy the acreage that they're on.
That's it. Incrementally, we're having this sliced away from us. The ability for young people to go in farming and food production with confidence, because there are layers of things going against them, this being a great example of that. One of the things
is the supermarket issue largely to blame for this, because producers have been pushed out of profit in what they produce?
No. Supermarkets are part of the challenge. So to give you an example, when you buy a steak these days in the supermarket, let's say you pay $14 for an average steak in the supermarket, less than 20% of what you pay goes to the producer of that steak, and that steak has been built for you in just over 4 years, of which 4 years of that risk and cost sits with the primary producer, yet they get less than 20% of the return. But the issue is bigger than the supermarkets. The issue is the whole supply chain. And there are a number of things that come into that. The costs of doing business, the state of our roads in regional communities, indeed supermarket monopoly power, all of those are elements of it. But at its core is this concept of natural capital. And I just want to spend a moment on that, because about 6 years ago, some incredible leaders in agriculture, some producers and AgForce members said there's got to be a better way than getting sliced up bit by bit. New vegetation laws, new reef laws, new regulations, new reporting, et cetera, which we might touch on tonight. There's got to be a better way. And they have built over 6 years what's called AgCare. They have invited the scientific community to test it and validate it. And indeed, Queensland's chief scientist, just retired, was on that panel, Hugh Possingham. And they've built something called AgCare. And what AgCare does is it measures and baselines your natural capital on your property. And that's all elements of natural capital. Some of that is monetizable, some of it's not. So offsets, for example, are monetizable. What those producers are saying now is it's really important you baseline what's on property, because it's getting taken from you by multiple people, whether it be the supply chains, whether it be the regulators, whether it be the banks, whether it be whatever. And until you baseline and understand your full portfolio on property of natural capital assets, which includes air, water, carbon, soil, all of those things, understand the value of that, and then start the renegotiation process, we'll continue to get sliced off bit by bit. There is indeed an inquiry going on in Canberra right now about what our requirements as producers will be under what's called the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, which requires us to provide more and more information, do less and less things, be controlled more and more down the supply chain, rather than keeping control of our own destiny, recognising the value of what we have on property and charging fairly for that. And that's the important part. You can't tell me these days, if you're starting, for example, from scratch, that you will ever be able to save enough money to buy the land, given the value on that agricultural land. And if you are able to buy that land, you will never get a return, because it's always being sliced off you by things such as what we're talking about tonight. So we now believe at AgForce that the only answer is to use AgCare that's been produced by producers, for producers, validated by the scientific community, to baseline your start point and start a different conversation.
I think you and I can have a separate conversation about a group called My Place around Australia, and I think we can get some good heads together there. What is the biggest issue? I mean, we all see plenty of advertising for paddock to plate type businesses. Why can't we upscale that in our own way? Why can't the community come together? Why can't the farmers come together, or the producers, not just the farmers, it's the producers of everything come together and say, righto, well, enough's enough. And I know we need buying power, and I know we need transportation. But if the farmers are on their land now and they already have trucks that can do the carting, then it's just a matter of organisation, isn't it? Coordination and costing, because we actually have the hardware to do this. We just lack maybe the drivers and the destinations to take things to at the moment, because there are certainly vast numbers of people that would order direct from, if not the producer itself, then I go back to the days of the Murray Goulburn Co-op, right? I grew up, my grandfather had a dairy farm, and I grew up in the wheat fields of the Wimmera. So I have a bit of an understanding. I wasn't a farmie, but I have a bit of an understanding of sort of what's involved. Now, there used to be these co-ops, these farmers' co-ops that did work for the farmer, and the towns that they were in, the whole town got behind them. And I remember when Murray Goulburn got sold out to international interests and they started closing down their co-op shops. And there was a huge hue and cry through the Western District of Victoria, because these places were iconic, particularly for the people on the land. There's none of that anymore. What stops us joining with you, with AgForce, joining with My Place and creating something new like that?
I don't think anything stops us from doing it. We need the reason to do it. And I think we're probably at that point. So this conversation is a powerful one, and it's one that's being had within industry, but something has to change, or we're not going to be getting the young people through into agriculture, and we're not going to be getting that food security that we take for granted. And all of those things we take for granted are going to start to fall apart. We see that evidence overseas now. You mentioned the dairy industry. It's a great example. You know, you look at Australia's trajectory on dairy. We used to be a huge exporter of dairy product, powder, cheeses, and other things. We're now struggling to meet domestic supply. The situation is even worse in Queensland. And you look at those dairy farms that do exist, a lot of the milk goes from a dairy farm, for example, in northern Queensland, all the way south to get processed and all the way back up north to go into the supermarkets, and we claim supply chain efficiency. At what point do we take our own destiny back? At what point has this gone too far? And I suspect with some of the conversations we're having that we're close to that point. And I'm not a producer, but I represent producers, but I'm hearing these conversations, and I think they're important ones to have.
Are there producer groups that are in favour of covering their, very viable land with solar panels and windmills over actually getting out and working in the farm?
Not many that I see. And even those that are, because they're driven by financial imperative or debt that they're struggling to get out from under, and all of those challenges, which I can completely understand because they're very debilitating. But nobody is, hugely enthusiastic for prime ag land to go into these solar farms. Even those that are contemplating it because they're stuck in a really difficult position would rather have an alternative, would rather have another one out of the predicament they find themselves in, feel awful about this prime ag land going under solar panels. But equally, sometimes we don't see it coming. So under the planning laws in Queensland now, we don't know these things are turning up until the deal's been done. So you as a producer may have no success because your children have gone and done something else. So you sell that land in good faith to somebody else, not knowing that as soon as the deal's done, they're going to put up solar panels because they don't care about agriculture.
Yeah,
so
they're an urban farmer who's come out to sit on their veranda and look at the view over the top of the solar panel farm they've acquired.
That's it. And so, and part of our conversation back on the Great Artesian Basin is we believe that, and this is a great conversation we're having, this broader conversation must be had with all Australians. They respect farmers and producers, but they do take them for granted. They don't understand the pressures they're under, but also the pressures that are building on them and put in place by various bits of legislation and regulation and other things we've touched on tonight. But there will come a point when what we take for granted may no longer be there, and we'll regret that day. So this conversation with the broader Australian public is really important. You have producers you can be so proud of. They look after the environment, they look after the landscapes, they care about biodiversity, they care about their animals. They do all of that, and they produce quality food. And yet we see, for example, just to use Western Australia for a moment, the nonsense and lies that are being told about the live export business are just terrible. that, for example, ship that got turned back recently, and all of that stuff that got talked about from Animals Australia about mortality, etc., the mortality on that ship was less than the mortality in the natural environment. And those animals put on an average of 20 kilograms while they were living in that 7-star resort, with mortality less than they would have in their natural environment. They are facts. Yet we have Animals
People
Australia.
at Animal Australia might want to have a look at the mortality rate of children born in the first 28 days in Australia. That's more concerning to us at the moment, I'm afraid.
Spot on.
Yeah.
Spot on. Yeah. So, a broad conversation, an important conversation. The one we're having tonight's great. How do we elevate that? How do we bring everybody into it? How do we make people understand what's at stake? And indeed, for those of us lucky enough to travel internationally, and I've been in Asia and places a little bit, boy, oh boy, what we've got back at home, we should protect and look after and understand the value of it's huge.
Why is it, Michael? I'm not a scientist. I don't know your background completely, but I imagine that you're not too scientifically orientated. How is it that you and I can come to a reasonable assumption that shoving 330 million tonnes of CO2 waste into the Great Artesian Basin isn't a good idea? And yet our government, our Queensland government, has invested $35 million into the project when Glencore has cleaned up $34.1 billion in financial year 2023. How is it and why is it that we, the people, are paying $35 million for this farce through the Queensland government? And I imagine you've been rather vocal in your representations to them. What's their reply?
I certainly haven't, and let me describe it in even worse terms to you. If Glencore get the approval they are seeking, not only will they put waste into this Great Artesian Basin in a way that is irreparable and will start the decay of what is a natural wonder of the world and something a lot of people rely on, but they will actually, under the current structure, be able to claim carbon credits and clean energy from that Millmerran power station because they're pumping that carbon underground. That's the ridiculous nature of the ACU scheme that's been set up by the federal government in that case to allow people to trade carbon. So at all levels, at all levels of government, this is a tragedy. And there have been federal government approvals and state government approvals for this proposal to get it to where it is now. And we're only one state approval away from Glencore being underway. And that's the travesty. So the point you raise is right. It is one of a number, though, where I simply can't understand, how there is another side to this argument. AgForce takes on some debates, and we mentioned live export before, where I disagree with the counter view, but I can sort of understand there might be a counter view from some who don't understand animal agriculture. But I cannot understand how any human being could think that pumping industrial waste into a pristine water resource and allowing the people that do that to claim carbon credits is a good idea. And if they get to pump this 330,000 tonnes in the so-called pilot, there is millions of dollars in credits they can claim. So we as taxpayers will be paying them to do it through the credit scheme. So it just gets worse and worse.
The most farcical piece of this that I find is that the 330,000 tonnes they say they're going to put in over 3 years is going to be made up of operational emissions from all the steam and electricity equipment used to actually do this pumping process. They're going to generate 266,368 tonnes of CO2 emissions, giving you a net, I think I've put another slide up. I haven't got it. But anyway, 19,000, it's essentially a net 19,000 tonnes will get put in there that, wasn't generated by the system that is putting it in there. It is abject stupidity.
Yes. And it's funded by the carbon trading scheme set up by the federal government. So it tells you that scheme is not doing what it's designed to do. And this is why agriculture is crying out for help. We want to support the environment and we want to grow food and we want to provide food security to Australians, and we're not being allowed to do any of that. It's an absolute travesty.
you won't find too many people watching this program at the moment that don't believe there is corruption at, epidemic levels inside our state, local, and federal governments. Clearly, you must fight that every day. But this piece of stupidity, you can't fight alone. How can we get behind you? What can we do in these weeks? And they are very important weeks ahead to make sure this doesn't go ahead. I believe that there might be a safety, well, we'll call it a safety net, but Tanya Plibersek is the one who's holding the rope on that safety net. So how safe it is remains to be seen. Do we bombard Plibersek now and just make it very clear that this decision cannot be allowed to go forward? She, as I understand it, is the only person who can veto it.
That's correct. So a bit of background I get, but what you're saying is absolutely correct. The Federal Minister for the Environment, Minister Plibersek, has the right to withdraw or revoke the decision that was originally made at the federal level on the 9th of February 2022, revoke it and bring it back in. We have provided the evidence and material that the federal minister needs to do that. But also, given we are weeks away from a state level approval, we have also said that we will do anything we can to help you have the information, the insight to revoke that decision. But in the worst case scenario, and we don't want to do this, but in the worst case scenario, we'll go to the Federal Court of Australia within weeks, and we have a KC reserved ready to do that, because we believe we have a sound basis to protect the GAB in the court if we can't do it through the political process. So to your very kind question, we believe at this point that is the only good, strong, guaranteed route to stop this in its tracks before it gets approval. And to do that, two things. One, the more the minister hears from the community, the more inclined I assume she will be to revoke the early decision. But secondly, and this is a selfish claim and request in some ways, we have a donations page up on the AgForce site. We have underwritten the legal action and all the work we're doing at the moment, for example, the full page ads. We're struggling under that financial impulse, but it's the right thing to do because we needed that underwriting up front so we go strongly. We have a donations page up. Anything, doesn't matter how small it is, that people can put into that donations helps keep us going, helps give us financial strength, and helps send a signal to the governments that might think they can outlast us and we'll run out of money. That's not going to be the case. We have the money we need. We have the legal advice we need. We have the technical advice we need. This decision should not have been made the way it was made on the 9th of February 2022. The federal minister has the ability to revoke that. She needs to do that now, and we have the information to help her make that decision.
So that's your website there. You can go to check it out yourselves, folks. I think it's agforce.org.
Yes.
Let me have a look. agforceqld.org.au. agforceqld.org.au. And there is plenty of great information, not just only on this abysmal project that they're trying to do for the Great Artesian Basin, but many other things that are affecting Queensland farmers. Now, I would have thought you'd get a lot of support from federal politicians. I'm thinking Bob Katter, I'm thinking Malcolm Roberts, I'm thinking Antic, and I'm thinking Rennick. All of them should be climbing all over this. Any noises in the federal parliament?
A few. We would say, though, not loud enough, and we'd say to all federal politicians, now's the time to scream. AgForce has come out and given the platform for people to respond to, the media to engage with. Now is the time to make your view known loudly and clearly. And if you are in support of protecting one of the natural wonders of the world, the Great Artesian Basin, now is the time to stand up and say so. Silence is deafening. Silence is a travesty right now because of what we have at stake. And let's be clear, if that final state decision is made, which is a regulatory process, not a political process, if that's made in Glencore's favour, Glencore has the final approval. And while we can seek injunctive relief, in other words, pull it up for review, they can legitimately claim costs because they'll say they've got rigs and men ready to go. Agriculture, the industry can't afford the millions of dollars a day that might come in damages in costs that they might seek from us. The time to stop it's now. In the worst case scenario, it's around $1 million to go to the federal court and put your case forward. We're spending money now in the court of public opinion, as we call it. But your question is a really good one. Our request of all ministers, federal and state, of all political persuasions, is stand up now. Let's unite as a country, protect the Great Artesian Basin by revoking this particular decision, and then sit down and have the conversation to understand how we can make absolutely sure we don't get here again, and we can start to build that food security for the future, and so we can rely on it the way we have for the last few generations. That's the point we're at, and that's why this conversation tonight is so important. That's why it's important that people that can donate a few dollars. It's important that people that can write a letter to their local member, write a letter to the federal minister, but also that the politicians stand up and make their views clearly known, and hopefully in support of protecting what is just an amazing thing. Unfortunately, it's invisible, so a lot of us don't know too much about it, but it's massive. 130,000 times Sydney Harbour's storage. You know,
I know.
A great area than the Great Barrier Reef. It's massive, and there's nothing else like it in the world.
Is this more about proving the technology can work and we can bury, if you like, fossil fuel emissions underground and therefore keep our fossil fuel industry going a bit longer because we don't have to worry about what's coming out the tailpipe so much?
Well, I do understand, I'm not an expert in this, that if we use this carbon capture and storage, we have more chance as a country of meeting the targets we've committed to. But that's quite a separate conversation. The conversation we're having is to say we don't have anything against the proposed technology. If people want to pump carbon underground because that does better for the environment and the scientists are telling us it's the right thing to do, it helps us meet our targets, that's all good as far as we're concerned. Our issue is putting it in the Great Artesian Basin. There are all these, we've talked about it tonight, there are all these empty holes that were once oil fields full of oil where we've taken the carbon out. Why can't we just put carbon back down into those? There are a lot of them in Queensland. There are a lot of them in Australia. There is no need to put the Great Artesian Basin at risk at all, yet we seem keen to do that.
I'm going to put this slide up. I don't know whether or not I'm not going to ask you to make too much of a comment on it if you're not feeling comfortable, but I get the feeling that with names like the International Energy Agency and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change being involved in the background of all of this, that you're in for the fight of your life, and truth will not be used as a defense in any way, in any case. It's got to be concerning. Do you have a plan how you attack that sort of well, you either call it complete stupidity or corruption, because I don't know what else I'd call the IPCC, completely stupid or completely corrupt. There are only two choices.
Well, there are many challenges. Just take the IPCC as an example. They have, for example, published a lot of material talking about the fact that eating meat is bad for the health and bad for the environment, but neither of those two things are true.
Yep.
We believe at AgForce, as a small advocacy group in Queensland, all of these things come back to a fundamental conversation about food security and the role that our producers play in looking after the environment, looking after biodiversity, growing food that's healthy, locally grown, can look after our health, can look after the health of the environment. Because whether it be the IPCC that send out reports saying eating meat is bad for you and bad for the environment, whether it's the new eating guidelines suggestions that came out this week that said we now need to include the environment in our eating decisions, and by the way, meat. All of these little side conversations which come in a very narrow vein rather than the broader conversation about the health of meat, the health of a balanced diet, how agriculture, particularly in Australia, adds value to the environment and builds biodiversity. Just take Queensland, which I'm more familiar with than all of Australia, 13 unique bioregions, 84% of the state in its natural state, for want of a better word. Ruminant animals, grazing properties, ruminant animals are a central part of the carbon cycle. They've been there for tens of thousands of years. They used to be called kangaroos. They're now called cows and sheep. They are, without them, we don't have a carbon cycle. We don't have the ability to put carbon back into the earth. There are many angles you can go at on this. So I'm delighted to put the slide up, but those very thin statements that are factually incorrect and take a little part of the argument rather than the broad understanding, put at risk food security, are a real issue for Australia. And we will wake up one day with food insecurity. We used the dairy example before. We used to produce many times the amount we needed in Australia, and we made export earnings from it. We are getting to the point where we only make enough for us. So that is, an example of where we're heading. With other things, we don't pull it up. So the examples you use, I think, are good ones.
We make enough baby formula now for China as well, though.
Yes,
and wasn't there a run on our Australian milk from China a couple of years ago as well, because they were obviously having troubles? Their own cows were producing something toxic or something.
Well, one thing you haven't done is enough homework on me, because even though we had a scientific background or not, so let me bring a little humour into it. I'm a Kiwi. I'm off a New Zealand farm, a sheep and beef farm originally. I have been in Australia for many years, and I do have Australian citizenship, to be fair to me, but I am from New Zealand. And it was about, I think about 15 years ago, I have the date wrong, when New Zealand did a very clever thing and, negotiated that dairy deal with China when Australia didn't know what was going on. And before we knew it, good old Kiwis shot out from under us with a far better deal that we've never been able to catch up with. And that's not the reason that the dairy industry struggled in Australia. It's all of the regulation, other things that we talk about. It's the supply chains, it's the cost, it's all of the things we're chatting about tonight. But that was a really interesting moment. And the New Zealand dairy industry went up from there. And sadly, that peaked and they've dropped terribly since they brought in all of this regulation, all of this environmental overlay, which was a complete overreaction to the challenges they have around climate over there, a complete misunderstanding, again, of the role producers play in looking after the environment. And there's no doubt in all walks of life we need to think about building better environmental outcomes, but not at the cost of food production, which adds to the environment. And so dairy is a fascinating story, but, you mentioned the IPC. There are many things we could talk about tonight, and we might have a future series, but at its heart, the food industry is one we can be immensely proud of. We should talk about, we should understand. The good old days of every child having an uncle who was a farmer and going out on the farm every weekend are gone. City-based children don't know where their food came from. They don't understand how that white stuff got on the bottle in the supermarket shelf. They just assume it was powder and water out the back. They don't know it came from an animal. So all of that we've lost over the years. Something like, we did the survey last year, something like 80% of children under 12 actually have zero idea where their food comes from. None. Wouldn't know where a steak comes from, wouldn't know what a vegetable, the background of a vegetable, none of that. So the basics are gone, and we're starting to lose what we've taken again for granted, which is that food security that a lot of the world doesn't have, but we do.
Being an employer, a CEO, you've been in the business a while. You've obviously had to employ a few people over your time. Have you ever wondered the lengths that an employer, say a government agency, would have to go to employ a complete staff of lactose intolerant, green apple hating vegans to oversee the agricultural portions of an industry of a country?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you're touching on a really interesting subject, and one of the things I'm really proud of about the industry I represent is people don't make assumptions or judgments on people's dietary habits, for example. So if you want to be a vegetarian or a vegan, then all the best to you. What they do is they stand proudly behind their product and they promote their product like we all do in small businesses where there's marketing, etc. involved. And it's been really interesting. So we had the meat-based alternatives with all of the initial public offerings, mostly in North America, skyrocketing share prices, predictions of doom for the Australian food industry, particularly the red meat industry. All of those companies are either bankrupt or share prices at a fraction of what they were. The industry in Australia never picked on that. If you want to eat a lab-grown product which has none of the nutritional benefits of a naturally grown steak, then that is your choice to make. And what industry does, and one of the reasons I'm so proud to work for them, is they promote what they do. They're proud of what they do. They're always looking to do it better. They're not picking on others, but sadly, others seem to be interested in picking on us. And that's the frustration. And I think a little bit of what has come through in the conversation tonight is how do we reset that conversation so every Australian understands what we do. We all have our differences of opinion, but the foundational pieces like animal mortality on ships we talked about before, or the role of ruminant animals, or how biodiversity can work alongside sustainable agriculture, all of those conversations are had. They're back in the schools. Kids know where the food comes from. It's a mighty mountain to climb, but one that we can't afford not to try and do.
Yeah, if we were going to talk animal mortality, we could have a great conversation about the spirit of Tasmania and horses, but we'll leave that for another night. Tucker Carlson, when he went to Russia recently, went into a Russian supermarket, spent $100 on food there. It would have cost him $400 in America to buy the same stuff. It's been costed here in Australia at over $600. Who's getting rich? Because we know the farmers are going broke and we're going broke paying for it.
Yeah, it comes back to the earlier conversation, I think, which is the supermarket review is important, but it needs to be much broader, because somewhere between the farm gate and the supermarket shelf, just to take that steak example we used earlier, there's over 80% added to the cost of that item. So I bought a steak last week, I think I mentioned earlier, for $14 in the supermarket. Less than 20% of that goes to the person that spent 4 years building that steak. And over 80% goes to all the people that over a few weeks took it from paddock to supermarket. And that's the bit that we need to unravel and understand. And there's absolutely elements of supermarket monopoly power and pricing power. And we're starting to see that come through the review already. We're sure that'll eventuate, it'll become clearer, and they'll have a role to play in sorting themselves out around that. But the whole supply chain needs to be questioned, not only in Australia, but certainly in Australia. And I think your idea of why don't we go back to farmers taking the food through to a local market, people buying locally, I think we're starting to see it, and I think we'll see more of it going forward. That's the whole thing.
We can furnish places around Australia today where people could order online, and all they have to do is turn up and pick up their order. Now, the problem is, as you say, the supply chain, getting it from the paddock to that car park or that office or that business or wherever, warehouse for them to pick it up. But I believe there is a solution that can be found. I mean, how many trucks are sitting idle at the moment? How many, young folks, I was going to ask you about this too. So keeping younger people working on the farm these days is much harder. It's not like it was 40, 50, 60 years ago. The world is a much smaller place. They've got access to the internet. They can go to concerts. Airfares are cheaper. And of course, the big city has all the lights and the bright stuff that attract young ones away. And unfortunately, you wind up with having nobody on the farm to take over the family's interests. How do we keep or attract people back to our farmland? And is there a way, another subject that I'd love to talk to you about at another time is the fruit picking market, or the casual farm worker market. Is there a way, using both our immigration, our backpackers, and potentially maybe unemployment or youth criminals who aren't, really bad, is there a way that we can come up with a solution that will not only help food security for us, give the farmers some security in what they're doing, but also maybe give a career path to young people?
Oh, what a great subject. And yes, we could spend a few hours on it. I'll be delighted to do so. But there are some fundamental pieces which you touched on, which are worth flagging, briefly. Before COVID, with the visa system that was in place for the casual worker market that we couldn't fulfill with locals, there was a great system where people, for example, from Europe could come and enjoy and learn about Australia while they were young and before they got into all the commitments us older people get into. And they could extend that stay by 6 months by going and doing a bit of work on a regional property. So they'd learn more about Australia. They'd become more connected with us. The friendships and the learnings would grow. So everybody was a winner. They had a longer time in Australia. They learned more about us. They learned indeed about our food production industry. And we had the casual workforce over and above what we could fund locally. And sadly, since COVID, despite the many attempts by industry, we haven't got that visa system back to where we need it. But the second part of the question is more fundamental, which is young people in Australia going on to farm. And one of the biggest frustrations for us is there are no pathways for someone that is not off a farm to get on a farm since we closed the agricultural colleges. Queensland used to have 4 agricultural colleges, the last 2 being Longreach and Emerald, which closed in 2019 despite the best efforts of us in industry. So we have, and again, this is not a promotional, but we have just finished setting up AgForce training, which is a joint venture between us and Response Learning. Response Learning are the largest private provider of agricultural education in Australia. They're very good at what they do. They're mostly in meat processing at the moment, but together we're building training pathways over a couple of years, both online but also augmented reality and practical on-farm training, which is critical to allow those pathways to re-emerge again, because there are a number of people in Brisbane, in the big cities, who want to go out and be a ringer for a year. But if you don't know which end of the cow is safe to walk around, how can you walk onto property with a station owner signing off their workplace health and safety obligations if they have no idea about an animal, no idea about a quad bike, no basic training that the Longreach colleges of the world used to provide? I know, for example, that the full 2-year program in Longreach right up to the end spent the first week on how to make your bed, how to wash your clothes, how to get a square meal, because a lot of those skills have been lost, which you need out on the stations.
Exactly.
It's gone. So industry believes there are young people that want to have a go. And when they get to have a go, there are a large number of them that stay and build a career in agriculture. They just need those pathways. And a government-owned TAFE system, which sits only in the southeast corner of Queensland now, and expect you to sit online and become competent in yards and safe in yards so you can get out be a ringer, is just a joke. You need practical, hands-on training to give those basics before you go on farm. We're doing some work with the cane industry at the moment. There are young people that want to come and be haul-out drivers, sitting in a big tractor driving around, in a haul-out season. But we know it takes a week or 2 of training to be safe in a haul-out vehicle because of the weight carrying and the work that you're doing. There's no pathway for those people now. AgForce training is building one, which, interestingly enough, and we're learning a lot from Response, is partly augmented reality. So you can do 2 or 3 days, would you believe, and I've tried it, it's true, driving a tractor, rolling a tractor without actually getting in a tractor. It's actually quite scary how real it feels.
Wow.
What it means is when you get into the actual tractor for training, you've done half of your work. So you might have 2 or 3 days left. So it's a great pathway. People can sit and do the augmented goggles thing for a couple of days. If they pass all of that, they sort of got an idea of what's coming. They've felt it, they've touched it in augmented reality, albeit, but not just online. So a large number of those will go through the rest of the training. The costs will be cheaper. The kids can get out and do the haul-out work. The farmers have the workers they need. We're not relying on casual people from overseas. Workplace health and safety standards improve. Everybody's a winner. So that training and those pathways are really important. And I'd love to have a longer conversation with you about the whole. Really important.
I'd love to have a go on your headset. And I'll tell you why, because until the Voice of Freedom started, and I was working radio and then just doing voiceovers, but I like driving. So essentially, in my time where I've had time, I go and drive stuff. And I see things as a challenge. I wanted to learn how to drive a header so that I could go and help during cropping season, just to see what it was like, help out in the cropping season, driving a header. But it turns out apparently the header is the top job. You need to lower your expectations a little bit. Once again, it's a pathway that nobody knows about. Oh, gee, I want to drive a header. Well, you can't drive a header. First of all, you need to know what this grease gun does and what a grease nipple is. And that thing over there has got 22 of them. Go and find them.
That's it. That's it. Yep. And spend a year in a chaser bin first. You know, all of those.
Yeah. So, but as there is no path, there might be lots of people like myself who might have a few years on them, might be urged into early retirement for whatever reason and not feeling the urge to stay retired. But, you know, we've got plenty of time on our hands. Wouldn't mind taking the caravan out, camping on your farm and helping you strip 100,000 acres of wheat. But I don't know how to drive anything. How can I? Well, is this a pathway for me in my 50s or my 60s?
Well, it is. Absolutely it is. And, you know, again, this is not a promotional about AgForce, but AgForce's role, we're a small advocacy group. We shouldn't be setting up training joint ventures. We shouldn't be taking out full-page ads on the gab. We should be doing the foundational work that members pay their fees, and it's a voluntary membership organisation, pay for us to do. But we're increasingly doing things that we shouldn't be doing and producers shouldn't be paying for through us. And one of them's AgForce training. And AgForce training is rapidly filling that gap to allow people of whatever age with no experience who have a desire to go and drive machinery or a desire to go and live in the outback and work with animals for a year or whatever, to do the basic training so that when they get there, the producer says, I have the confidence that they have the basic understanding, the basic workplace health and safety, so I can take them with that basic training rather than bringing someone on who's absolutely agreeing with all the risks that attach around equipment or animals. And that's the role that the Longreach, Emerald and other ag training providers played over many years. Queensland is Australia's largest agricultural state, yet we've chosen to close the last 2 agricultural colleges. It stuns me. It would have been a great industry to attract other people from interstate to come and learn and grow, et cetera, et cetera. It's all gone.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Well, mate, I'll just stick my hand up now and say that I've watched over the last 4 or 5 years probably 500 hours of a Scottish hoof trimmer called the Hoof GP. So if anybody needs a hoof trimmed, I've got a lot of sharp knives, no formal qualifications, but I'm willing to give it a go.
Noted, I'll pass it on. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Michael, I've enjoyed this chat tremendously. We probably haven't discussed as deeply as I would have liked to the true dangers that we are facing with this decision to try and pump CO2 into the Great Artesian Basin. Like you say, it is an important time frame. We have weeks to end this stupidity, and maybe, as you say, letters to your local member. Get in touch with Senator Roberts, Bob Catter. Get in touch with Senator Rennick. Get in touch with Senator Antic. They seem to be the only voices in the parliament at the moment that are able to rise up and speak for the people when they choose to. So I would urge everybody to end what you're doing right now. When we finish this, sit down, write an email off and say, what the are you thinking about allowing this? And put pressure on Plibersek to end this stupidity sooner rather than later. It has to end. It cannot be allowed. And I think I said to you today, Michael, when we were talking about setting up this interview, I have never been a tree-hugging hippie, but I will chain myself to the gates to stop them being able to access the hole they want to pump this shit down, and I will gather thousands of people around me to do that. This cannot be allowed to happen.
Thank you very much. The support's really appreciated. We'll continue to do our best, and if we all rise and our voices are heard collectively, maybe we've got half a chance.
Thank you, mate. And you know, you got friends here at the Voice of Freedom and the Freedom Broadcasting Network anytime. Love to have you on and chat deeper about these other issues. And I'll talk to you privately about how my place and AgForce might be able to come together, and the training option might be something else my place can help with too. So there are some, I think, out of this conversation, some significant avenues of follow-up, and I'm very excited about them. So thank you for taking the time and joining us today. I don't know how many other mainstream media interviews you get to do, but I will do my best to make sure I pass you around the alt media group, so to speak, so that everybody gets a chat.
Thank you very much, and appreciate all the listeners coming on and listening tonight. It's been really appreciated.
Good on you. Thank you very much. Thank you very
Right.
much. Michael Guerin from AgForce Queensland, the CEO. It is an unbelievably serious matter that Glencore have been given permission by the criminals that call themselves the Queensland government to pour 330,000 tonnes of CO2 into the Great Artesian Basin. Now, they are making all sorts of excuses saying, oh, it's only going into this little area here and it's brackish water and it's this and it's that. Well, as Vince pointed out very early in the chat, CO2 and H2O equals carbonic acid. You're going to tell me that's something we really want in the Great Artesian Basin? My God, it is just amazing, the idiocy. And folks, we elect these people, right? We elect these people. They are criminals. And if they're not criminals, they're too bloody stupid to get your vote this next time round. From local to state to federal, you cannot vote for these people again. And you need to use your discernment about the replacements that will stand up for them, because many of them will be just the same. And that's happening in local council right now. There is intimidation happening in just the Redlands area that I'm part of, where a current sitting councillor has been followed home, has had death threats leveled against him, physical violence leveled against him and his family, the whole deal. And it's not the first time. I happen to know somebody who ran in this particular area some years ago. She's very close to me. And she was followed home, a single woman who's very big into helping her community. She was followed home and harassed, harangued, abused, all to try and get her out of the running for this thing. There are people claiming to be one thing in your local government elections and being funded by the exact people you hate. Use your discernment. Wake up. Do some investigation. Don't just drive past those council placards that are up at the moment in Queensland. Vote whoever for mayor and vote whoever for division whatever. Make sure you look into who that person is. Who that face is on that poster. What would you be voting for? In Nambour, or in the Sunshine Coast, you can vote for this bloke. His name is Camillo for Division 10 on the Sunshine Coast. Camillo is one of our family. He is a great community member, a very, very staunch man of action. And he won't back down. He'll stand up for your rights and my rights. Not just on the Sunshine Coast, but right across Australia. Strong advocacy, it's a hard word to say. So if you're in Division 10 on the Sunshine Coast, I commend Camillo Primavera to you. I could not do it more highly. He has been a great support to me since I set up and was living on the Sunshine Coast. In fact, he offered me a rooftop tent to live in when I needed it most. He is a true gentleman, a true community spirit minded individual, and a bloody workhorse. So if you are in Division 10, that's around Nambour and surrounding areas in the Sunshine Coast area of Queensland, then catch up with Cam. He's floating around. He shows himself all over the place. He'll probably be at pre-polling when that opens, and I commend him for your consideration. You'll know exactly what you get. He's a good man, and you need more good men and women on your council, Sunshine Coast. It's about as corporatized as it gets. It is the leading smart city council in the country. And I wonder how many of the councillors currently sitting on there aren't millionaires, haven't been able to upgrade their lifestyle somewhat. I'd really like to have a look at that, make an interesting review, but I don't have the time at the moment. But we'll get there one day. Have no fear. Have no fear. We will find it all. And that bloke might help us find some of it. If you want to invest your vote in somebody you can trust on the Sunshine Coast, pick Cam. Sorry, harping a bit. Tomorrow night, I might show you a few people in the Redlands who you might be considering voting for. Some performers in the current council, and well, you'll get to see how they perform both in council and outside the council. I've got to say, for a local government election, And I know it's always been a bit rough. I've never really taken much interest in them. But I can tell you from what I'm seeing and hearing behind the scenes now, there is so much similarity to the bitchiness, the infighting, the nastiness that comes out of a school council meeting or school council election in year 8. The same venom, hatred, animosity, threats, violence, all that shit that went on in the SRC election back in year 8, that's all happening today. You know why? Because the people who were bitching, moaning and fighting back in year 8 are now the ones representing you in council, because they liked being elected. It made them feel important. Didn't matter that they were expected to fulfill the people that elected them's wishes. Or no. Once you get into the council, it's all something beautiful. Bloody lies. Get people into your council that are going to work for you folks, not for the corporation. Get people into your council who will vote against smart cities, against irradiating you, against intruding on your privacy. Do not vote the same people back in, because they're responsible for projects, not local councils, like this one. This is the Gorgon LNG and carbon capture project in Western Australia. This is what it looks like from the air. Beautiful, isn't it? What are they doing? Well, they're planting their carbon capture credits into Barrow Island. And when I say into it, it's not really into it, it's under it, a long way under it. They're pumping it underground. Now, this was a $4 billion or $4.5 billion project, was going to be doing similar kind of numbers every year. It's been going now. It opened in 2019. After 2016, it was meant to open, but there were delays. Since 2019, so let's call it 5 years they've been running, they have never, ever been able to reach the targets that were predicted in their proposals for the build. Haven't missed it by just a little bit. Haven't missed it by, a quarter. They've been lucky to reach a quarter of the goals a year. Last year, they put less in the ground than they did the year before. Now, that project is owned by Chevron and Exxon, but it was all approved by the West Australian government, rubber stamped by the morons that sit in control of the Labor and or Liberal parties at the time in that place in Canberra. Can we really leave them there? Seriously, can we? I mean, what's it going to take for people to wake up? I got a troll that's playing on Facebook at the moment. And look, I don't care about trolls in any way, shape or form. I do try to educate them, but when they're not prepared to be educated, they just want to be abusive. Well, then I have a bit of fun. Lowered myself again today. Sorry about that. I am trying to do better. But these trolls are either politically motivated and paid to be that stupid, or seriously, we need to consider and truly understand what natural selection is all about. Maybe hand over the car keys a bit.
You let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up. Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life. It's not about food. It's about keeping those ants in line. That's why we're going back. Does anybody else want to stay? Let's rock!